Hi, folks. This is Jonathan Phoenix, the Carolina Storyteller, coming to you with an important message. Okay, this is an adult podcast, so it shouldn't be listened to by children. And if you're listening to this, I assume that you're an adult. And if you're not an adult, that's bad, because some of the things that we cover on this podcast are topics that really younger ages shouldn't be listening to. There's murder, there's death, there's blood, guts, and gore. Things that really they don't want to be exposed to. So as an adult, I'm going to ask you to keep the kids away. But I don't think every one of you is doing it. So I'm going to have to do something to curb this behavior if you don't stop. Maybe I'll tell your kids where Santa's real address is. Or maybe I'll tell them where babies come from. Or how to get a hold of the Easter Bunny and the Tooth Fairy. Or maybe I'll just tell them why the mailman always brings them birthday presents and why Daddy is really mad about it. So remember, keep the kids away from the adult material and enjoy the show. This is the Carolina Storyteller. Hey folks, welcome back to the Carolina Storyteller. I am your storyteller, Jonathan Phoenix, here with another great episode for you guys. A couple of announcements first. Valmont, the Black Raven Chronicles, now officially has its own page. There's actually a teaser trailer out. There will be another trailer, not a trailer, but a prelude kind of lead in to give you a hint of what's going on. That'll be dropping this week. You can find it just by looking up Valmont, Valmont, just about anywhere. It's making sure that it's distributed on every possible podcast hosting service I could think of. It's going to be hosted through Podbean. We were able to afford that to make sure that we got that thing going, so be sure to get out there and take a look at that. Also, if you go and look at that and subscribe to that, and you'll want to find out more about the show, head over to the Patreon, patreon.com/The Carolina Storyteller, and you can listen to interviews with the cast from the Vampire Queen Jacqueline, who is my assistant director on the project and is just enjoying putting people on the spot and digging out all the good information. There's some really great interviews, some really great cast members, some really great stuff going on. And you can find out all about it by going to patreon.com/The Carolina Storyteller, supporting this podcast and that one. That's two shows you can support just by going there. And you can help us to make sure that we continue to produce quality material that you guys will just love to listen to. So please go to the Patreon, show some support, and pretty soon merch is going to be coming around. So Christmas is coming up. You got to buy the Christmas presents, and what better Christmas present than to buy a Valmont t-shirt or a Carolina Storyteller coffee mug? I mean, come on, who doesn't want a coffee mug that says "The Lizard Man Rocks" or "Lavanya was pranked"? I don't know about you, but I would definitely want one. So you can find out all about that by going to patreon.com/The Carolina Storyteller or thecarolinastoryteller.com. Now, I've chilled for a few minutes and I'm ready to get started on a story. Aren't you ready for a story? I know you are. I mean, of course you're ready for a story. Have I got a story for you? But I didn't come up with this story, unfortunately. This story was actually a viewer request. So I'm going to give a shout out now to Liss, my friend from Ouch Was That a Ghost, who during a conversation said, I really want to hear you do this story. And I'm like, okay. And Liss has requested that I do a few stories. And this is really the first one that I've gotten around to doing. But Liss, this is your fault, just so you know. So again, thank you to Liss from Ouch Was That a Ghost for suggesting that today we talk about spontaneous human combustion. Dun, dun, dun. Sorry, I don't have a sound effects guy, so I have to do it myself. But yes, spontaneous human combustion. That rumored event that happens where a human suddenly bursts into flames and quickly burns to ash. If you can't tell in my voice, I am a real skeptic about this one. And there's a reason why. I worked as a firefighter for over a decade and a half, okay? It was 17 years in the fire department. I have a degree in fire science and emergency management. I'm kind of an expert on this stuff. And when I tell you that it doesn't work like that, I'm not lying. The only problem is that, granted, while I know science says it doesn't work like that, there are reported cases where apparently, somehow, it does. So let's get into a little bit of the science on it real quick, because I just love the science. So for fire to work, if you do not know, you need three things. Well, technically four, but we're not going to get into the fourth one. You need oxygen, you need fuel, and you need some type of heat source. Now, everything has what's called an ignition temperature. That is a temperature at which it lights on fire by itself. For paper, it's 451 degrees Fahrenheit. Nice little neat fact that you might want to find. In fact, it's the reason the book by Ray Bradbury was named 451 degrees Fahrenheit, because it's about burning books, and books were made of paper. So yeah, there's that fact. Self-ignition temperature means that it is the temperature that something has to be raised to where it will automatically burst into flames and burn on its own. Before that temperature, it will not burn. And this is, everything has this somewhere. There's liquids have it. Of course, like the ignition temperature for gasoline is like 120 degrees, I think, or something like that. Oil that you cook with actually has a very low ignition temperature. This is why if you leave a pot of oil on the stove, it will burst into flames sometimes. And that's how you get burning oil. It's not that a flame reaches up and touches it, or that it touches the eye. It's that it gets hot enough that the oil self-ignites. It reacts with the oxygen and produces fire. And this is really how a lot of kitchen fires start, is from grease self-igniting because it becomes hot. Something you should know in the future, and that way you have an idea about, watching the temperature in your kitchen so that you don't self-ignite your grease. Kitchen fires are very dangerous. Be very careful when frying. Why am I bringing up self-ignition? Well, because spontaneous human combustion literally involves self-ignition. The idea behind it is that the human body catches itself on fire. In fact, in most cases where spontaneous human combustion has been recognized as being the cause, the main reason that it is because there is no source of ignition that they can identify. There's nothing that would have caused the fire. So they have no way to rule except for the body just spontaneously caught fire somehow. Which, is a little weird when you say that, if you think about it, that guy was just sitting there and he just burst into flames. Okay. Now, that's all well and good. A human body bursting into flames, I could see that as being a problem. But the other thing with spontaneous human combustion is that there's the time and the heat factor. Now, in order for humans to burn to ash, they have to, if you've ever heard of cremation, which is where they take a body and literally burn it to ash, and then you get the ashes and you put them in a little jar and you put it up on your mantle, and, you've got the leftovers of grandma sitting on your mantle for the rest of your life. Grandma's just sitting in a little jar up there the whole time. It's a dead body up there, burned to ash in that little jar. And if you know anybody that has a little jar that's sitting up there and they say, "Oh, that's your grandpa's ashes," guess what? Your entire life, grandpa's been sitting up in that little frickin' jar. That whole time, that's what that's been. Dead body right there. Not saying it's creepy or anything, but I'm just saying, dead body right there in the living room. It's dead body. Don't care if it's been cremated, it's still a dead body. Beside the point. Cremation is done at like 2,500 to 3,000 degrees, I think. It might be a little higher than that. It might be closer to 5,000 degrees. That's really, really hot. Okay? For example, you burn yourself at around 175 degrees. You can get a minor burn at 175 degrees. At 200 degrees, you're definitely getting a minor burn. Water boils at 200 degrees. That's the temperature that water boils. All right. 451 degrees, paper automatically catches on fire. So when I tell you that the human body has to be at like 5,000 degrees, 4,000 or 5,000 degrees before it can be burned to ash, you have to understand that's a huge gap. A huge gap. I mean, think about it. You know how hot it gets at 105 degrees in the middle of the summer. Imagine if it was 5,000 degrees. Well, you don't have to imagine, because remember, the sun is extremely hot. Probably around 6,000, 7,000 degrees. Well, it's probably more than that. Probably closer to 40,000 degrees, I think. I can't remember. I don't know the math, and I'm not really looking into it. Lava is usually around 3,000 degrees. Okay, lava. And the body has to be hotter than lava before it can be reduced to ash. That's how hot they have to get the body to reduce it to ash, and it still takes some time. And spontaneous human combustion is supposed to be just like spontaneous. Like, all of a sudden there's a body, it bursts into flames, and now the body has burnt itself into ash. What are we going to do? Oh, woe is me. Ugh. Which brings me to the other thing. Time. A human body, even if it is raised to that temperature, is going to take time to burn. Have you ever had a fire? When you put the log on the fire and the log starts burning and the log gets up to the temp where it's got fire going on it, it doesn't just instantly turn to ash. It takes maybe half an hour to an hour to 2 hours, depending on the size of the log, for the fire to burn all of that material and turn all of that material to ash. So it can't just be done instantaneously. No matter how hot you get the fire stoked, it still takes time for the process. So the way these things happen, the timing is off. And lastly, the biggest thing that I have a problem with is that in cases of spontaneous human combustion, you have the evidence that is found is typically a pile of ashes surrounded by generally a lot of untouched, undamaged things from the fire. Now, why does that bother me? Well, because a hot fire radiates heat. And we've already discussed that a lot of things at certain temperatures auto-ignite. They burst into flames on their own. So if I tell you that the human body has to burn at, 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 degrees to turn to ash, then you should assume that everything nearby, gets that radiant heat. Remember I mentioned the sun being so hot? Well, it is millions of miles away. Okay, at the speed of light, it takes 8 minutes to get to the sun. That's how far away it is. It is that far away, and yet it is the source of heat that heats our planet every day. It radiates heat off of itself, and that comes so far that it keeps our planet nice and warm, and that's why they call it a sunny day, and that's why we have 110 degrees during the summer. Also, when we move further away from it, that's why we have 32 degrees during the winter, because when we're not as close to the sun, we're not getting as much radiation from the sun. So in a small room, a 5,000 degree heat source would it should be spreading that heat everywhere. And if it's heating everywhere all around it, then those things should be catching on fire too. But in the cases of spontaneous human combustion, they don't. And that's where the science doesn't match up. But as I said, even though the science doesn't match up, there are still cases. And now we're going to get into some. So let's get into these cases. The first case I want to talk about occurred in the 1950s with a young lady named Mary. She was 76 years young. She lived alone. And Mary was apparently slightly overweight by what her child said. And what happened was one morning, her neighbor was apparently walking by. She smelled smoke, and she reached to touch Mary's door to knock on it and felt like the door and doorknob were very hot. So she immediately contacted the fire department. The fire department, of course, arrived. They, too, smelled the remnants of smoke, like there had been fire. Not that there was fire, but could be that there was fire going, and it just wasn't a big fire yet. And they felt that the door was warm, but not like, oh my God, there's a raging inferno behind it. They forced entry into the apartment, and what they found was in the middle of her living area, kind of separated from everything, was her easy chair that she liked to sit in. In the easy chair, which was scorched and burnt to a degree that was no longer usable in the center, was a pile of ashes. Her hands and her legs from her knees down were all that remained. The legs, of course, sitting in front of the chair. There was nothing else left. It was just gone. They found no source of ignition. They found no clues as to what could have caused her to have been burnt so badly. There was no accelerants found. There was no, there wasn't anything nearby that could have burned her. Her daughter postulated that because she was overweight and because she was a smoker, her daughter believed that she had fallen asleep with a cigarette and was wearing a nylon fabric type of, I guess, muumuu or night dress, and she fell asleep with her cigarette. The cigarette dropped and lit the night dress on fire, and the night dress lit her on fire. Before she was able to react, the smoke and inhalation killed her basically in her sleep, is what the daughter probably thought had happened. And then her fat itself continued to stoke the fire and provided the heat accelerant because of, human fat. It's fat, which is, technically grease, which we all know grease causes a grease fire. And it was the fat that gave it the accelerant that allowed everything to be burnt to ash. Folks, grease fires start at around like 375, 400 degrees, just so you know. Most oils self-ignite at that temperature. We've already talked about this earlier, self-ignition. But they don't freaking take temperature up to 4,000 degrees. It's just not, you'd need a steady stream of something like propane to do that. But what does the firefighter know? Yeah, so this is our first case. But wait, there's more. Now, if I didn't mention it before, Mary's case was in Wisconsin in the 1950s. Our next case takes place about 20 years later, in the 1970s, but it takes place in Pakistan. Way in the fuck over there. Where mere 30 minutes had passed between the time that his son had seen his elderly father and he came back and found his elderly father had caught fire and really literally reduced to basically a pile of ash. The only evidence that the elderly father was there were his shoes, which were miraculously kind of unburnt, and of course the feet were still in them. But all the rest of him was burnt to ash. Now, this is insane, to say the least. But once again, firefighters, responded. There was no damage to anything around the area. What they did mark in this case were scorch marks on the ceiling. Whatever had happened had burned very hot, very fast, and was burning hot enough that it did burn the ceiling. So I say there was no damage to the area. There was damage directly above. But anytime you have a fire, you should expect damage directly above. It doesn't matter if it spreads or not. Candle can actually cause that over time because heat does what? It goes straight up. So that wasn't surprising. It was just evidence that there was a very hot, very fast flash burn there. But there was still no explanation of what caused it, what initiated it. It was believed that he had a penchant for hot, spicy foods, and that he had eaten something that interacted within his stomach with other things and the chemical reaction caused a burst of heat, which caused him to burst into flames. Yes, this is the explanation he gave. His hot and spicy diet was so hot and spicy that it burned him alive. Folks, I'm not making this shit up. I wish I was. I really do. And of course, this is the early 70s. And this man was only in his 50s. And yes, it was believed he was overweight. But, folks, I wouldn't just stop there if I had, one overweight guy and another overweight guy. So I've got to go into the 90s, and I've got to kind of skirt over towards jolly old England, where a man was discovered after only a few hours with only his hands left, one of them still holding a pint, and he was, of course, an alcoholic. Now, this man was not obese, but he was a heavy drinker. And again, he was a smoker. And while they could find no ignition source, no accelerant, the furniture where he was sitting, the furniture was actually salvageable. It was not damaged so horribly that it could not have been reupholstered. Unlike Mary's in the first case that we talked about, which basically the center of the chair was just burned. Or the guy from Pakistan who's, all he had left were boots. This guy, he literally was a pile of ash except for one hand. And it was the only hand that really wasn't on the chair. It was reached over holding a glass on a table. And that's really the only reason that it survived, is because it wasn't near the actual center of the fire. And we call it the heart of the fire. Again, like I said, the investigations, they show up with nothing, no clues. Which, of course, that confuzzles people. Lastly, we're going to go to the 2000s. We're coming back to America again. This was actually in 2007, which ironically is the same year that my youngest son was born. But this was in the middle of the summer. And again, this one was a smoker. They were found in their bed. The bed was intact, but they were literally a pile of ash. It doesn't really give a statement. And this was in Texas, by the way. It didn't give a statement as to how long they had been left there, but it was assumed that it had been at least 12 hours since anyone had seen them, since they had said they were going to bed. The mattress was burned in the shape of their body. There was a burn there that was in the shape of the body, but the mattress and everything around them was kind of untouched. And again, remember what I said, radiant heat should have caught the fire, should have spread the fire. There was no spread for this fire. And that's just 4 cases. And understand that these are the 4 modern cases that I was able to come up with, but there have been reports of this going back hundreds and thousands of years. Spontaneous human combustion was accounted for as far back as the Romans and the Egyptians, probably in ancient China too. I just haven't had a chance to look and see how far deep it is. This thing has been going on for thousands of years, and we keep coming up with either we say it's spontaneous human combustion, or we come up with these cockamamie Rube Goldberg style ideas of how the fire killed someone. As I said, the guy in England, they said he had alcohol, and the alcohol became flammable and set him on fire. Somebody else said it was their diet. That guy in Pakistan, his diet caused him to set on fire because they were fat and a cigarette dropped. These things don't necessarily burn you alive. And then let's not forget the other big factor here is that if you're on fire, you're going to feel it, and you're going to move around and try and put yourself out. And that's going to cause the fire to spread. The fire didn't spread, and they literally stayed where they were. So were these people dead before the fire started? Were all of them dead? And if they were all dead, how long were they dead? You know, we have one guy, he had been seen within 30 minutes of being a pile of ash. And we have another person, it had been over 12 hours. So what's going on here? I do have a theory, okay? And it's called the smolder theory. Now, I say that, you know, things can't burn unless they're at this ultra high temperature that has to be reached in order to set fire. But that's not entirely true. Because if something does start burning and it smolders long enough, and you see this in smoldering fires, it will break down to ash over time. Now, what it is it's not that it's turning to ash at a lower temperature. It's that a small area, very small, minuscule, almost microscopic, is reaching that temperature over time, and that area is spreading. It's the same thing that happens with your cigarette. As you smoke a cigarette, you know, the heat is at the end of it, and it's a very small area that's that hot. If the heat were able to radiate more or it were hotter, the cigarette would burn up instantly. But because of the way thermodynamics works, unless you draw air in and increase that heat, the heat is just going to take its slow time burning the cigarette down, eventually burning it to ash. And were someone to die with a cigarette in their mouth and it dropped and it ignited something that was on them, and that started a small fire, and that fire eventually began to burn and continue to burn, and, you know, of course it would dry out the human body first, and then the human body would become flammable, and then it would start to burn that, and over time that fire could feasibly smolder and keep going long enough to reduce a human body to ash. In theory, understand this is a huge theory, and this is me just throwing it out because I know a little bit of science and I want to play with my scientific brain for a minute. But all in all, there's no clear explanation as to why these fires happened or as to how they were able to burn human bodies to ash. And folks, that is our story. Spontaneous human combustion. It is longer than normal, but it's just because this is just it's kind of a big one. Thanks a lot, Liss. Really. No, seriously. I'm glad that you listen, and I hope you enjoyed this one, and I hope you enjoyed the science behind fire and how it's driving me nuts that this is actually a thing that exists. Folks, remember, if you like the podcast and you want to hear more, you can go to patreon.com/The Carolina Storyteller. Get lots of exclusive stuff. You can check out everything that's going on with Valmont. Also, you know, bonus episodes and things. All of it's there at patreon.com/The Carolina Storyteller. Also, you can go to thecarolinastoryteller.com, and you can find our merch store where you can get all kinds of cool goodies and neat stuff that you can have. We've got more merch on the way, and that means more things for you to get. Christmas is coming up. Today would be a great day to start your Christmas shopping, and start your Christmas shopping by getting something from The Carolina Storyteller. Thanks for listening, guys. We'll see you next time, and as always, stay spooky, my friends.